Way back in 1986 in the United Kingdom, the UK and France announced plans to construct the Channel Tunnel, which they hoped would be opened by the early 1990s. Interestingly, for those who've watched my other videos, it was the year that the Sun newspaper alleged that the comedian Freddie Starr ate a live hamster. Sadly, it was the year that Clive Sinclair sold the rights to the ZX Spectrum and other inventions to Amstrad. The Australian TV soap Neighbours is launched on BBC One, more than a year after debuting in its native country, and amazingly the world's first heart, lung and liver transplant is carried out at a hospital in Cambridgeshire. But what about the entertainment industry? Well, it was the year of Top Gun, Aliens, The Golden Child and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. So all in all, rather a good year in my opinion. Whitney Houston asked How Will I Know? Huey Lewis sang about the power of love, Bon Jovi was living on a prayer, and Queen told us about a kind of magic. But as I always say, this is predominantly a gaming channel, so let's get down to the game. The game I'm talking about today is Defender of the Crown. I was born in a hospital in Nottingham. I grew up in Nottinghamshire, and I have early memories of being in Sherwood Forest. Back in the days when the major oak, the tree that Robin Hood apparently hid in, was still accessible for small children to climb and play around. Days back when it was perfectly acceptable for young kids to have toy bows, wooden swords, and, we'd roll around in the dirt, we'd swing our wooden sword around our head, we'd sword fight with our friends, and we'd declare ourselves the king of Sherwood Forest. I watched many TV shows with my dad growing up, Star Trek, Doctor Who, Blake's 7, but I also remember watching Robin Hood. The game I'm talking about today came out on the Amiga first, and then 1 year later in 1987 it hit a whole host of other platforms. It was on MS-DOS, it was on the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Atari ST, the ZX Spectrum, the Amstrad CPC, the Commodore 64, the Macintosh, the Apple II GS. Later on it was ported to the CD-TV and the CDI. And strangely, it's actually on the CD-TV I first experienced it, as far as I can remember. I only had a couple of games for the CD-TV. It was a very expensive system, and the 3 games I remember having were Lemmings, Wrath of the Demon and Defender of the Crown. Other than that, I had a bunch of educational software, like an atlas and an encyclopedia. But because I didn't have many games, I really focused on Defender of the Crown. And there was a period where it just kind of became my life. Every time I'd get home from school, I'd be straight on it. Weekends, I'd be on it. I'd play the game again and again, and whether I lost or completed it, I just had a hunger for it. It spoke to something within me. It was a slightly more adult way of me returning to that swinging the sword around my head, being the hero. And it also featured Robin Hood, who was, part of my local area's legend, so to speak. Okay, so the game is set during the Middle Ages. We're following the death of the king. Different factions, the Saxons and the Normans, are fighting for territorial control. The player assumes the role of a Saxon. You have a choice of Wilfred of Ivanhoe, Cedric of Rotherwood, Geoffrey Longsword or Wulfric the Wild, each of which has his own advantages, and you kind of pick the one you think is going to best meet your playstyle. The idea is that you amass armies and you fight for control of opponents' land and castles. During the game, you can engage enemy armies in battle. It's a very menu-driven system for that. Or you can lay siege to opposing castles, which starts with a basic catapult game, followed up by a menu-driven fight. Basically, you're shown how many men you have, how many men the enemy has, and given the option to stand and fight fiercely, or run away. You also have the option to go raiding, where basically you'll steal in the dead of the night into somebody's castle, sword fight, and try and get your way through the castle to get their gold. And you'll also be able to attend jousting tournaments. Now, at these jousting contests, you can decide to either basically play for honour or for land. Now, I have to admit, I am awful at the jousting. I hardly ever win it, so I always just play for fame and take the loss. From time to time, the player can try to rescue a damsel in distress. It'll tell you about how the Normans have run off with a beautiful Saxon woman. Do you want to give chase? And if you manage to do this, you then basically, she'll become your wife. Another thing you can do, you have 3 times that you can ask the legendary bandit Robin Hood for help. And it basically just means that him and his men will help you in a fight. They'll sort of shore up your numbers a little bit. The game's strategy basically boils down to basically who can amass the larger army, who can attack which territory at the right time. And it's kind of, you're getting a system where you're robbing Peter while he's robbing Paul. So you're taking the land from one guy who's taking it from another, and if you can kind of go around taking land along the side while 2 other people fight it out for a certain piece of land, you can amass more money and then your army will grow while they'll lose numbers by throwing men at each other. It's one of those games where, because it can be quite slow and you sit and make decisions, you can sort of sit and play it over a cup of coffee and take a gap to, you know, scratch your eye or have a conversation with somebody, and it doesn't totally wreck your game. I suppose this is the sort of thing I was playing before I knew about things like Fire Emblem and Final Fantasy Tactics, and I still think it's a great game to this day. It's nice because it's a game that keeps the old grey matter flowing. You have to think about what you're going to do and why you're going to do it. And it's sort of got that game of chess quality because, yeah, you'll get a scene for completing it, but every time you play, something different happens. Different moves are made, and you're always reacting to those moves. So every game of it feels like a fresh, new game. So it has a great replayability. I mean, I played it for hours and hours on the CD-TV, and then I found myself able to go to the NES version, which I actually think for the limitations of the console was a pretty good version. And then the Amiga version, which is the one I'm reviewing here and have played for the purpose of this. There's actually not much extra in the CD-TV version for all of the machine's apparent power. The main difference was that there was a lot of speech in the CD-TV. For example, for the intro you'd have a picture of Robin Hood and he'd be telling you the story. And when you were going to go and rescue a damsel in distress, it would say, "There's a beautiful damsel in distress being taken." And then the bits, like after you've saved the damsel, it'd say, "You saved the damsel," and then later that night. And yeah, these bits aren't needed at all, but they were nice little additions. They kind of helped the atmosphere and give the game a little bit more of a cinema-esque feel. But the core gameplay is great. It doesn't really need those. They're just nice little sprinkles of chocolate on top of the cappuccino, so to speak. In closing though, I think this is a great game. If you like a little bit of strategy in your games, a little bit of thought, and especially if you appreciate this sort of time period and the sort of knights and swords and Robin Hood-esque days, then you should definitely check this game out. I'd give it my strong recommendation. Anyway, thank you for watching me. Hope you've had a nice day and keep on gaming.
Made for rolling, mules are made to pack. I've never seen a sight that could